Hello, today we're discussing Parsha Shoftim. And as usual, we'll go through the content first. So we Jews commanded to appoint judges in every city of Israel. We must follow the rulings of the Sanhedrin, the Rabbinic Supreme Court, and of the oral, which is based, the rules are based on the Torah, the written Torah, and the oral Torah. Refusal to accept Sanhedrin's authority is a capital offense, and the judges are instructed to be fair and avoid even a perception of corruption. Capital punishments are prescribed for adultery, and various adulterous practices are banned, obviously. Basically, this is a reminder that the faith and justice are the foundations of civilized society. The alternative to faith and justice is anarchy. And we will come back to that in a few minutes. Think of what was going on before the flood. Rule of the jungle. Whoever was stronger could do anything he wanted. He could kill somebody, he could rape, he could pillage, he could do whatever. And that's why Hashem actually drowned all of them. Then Moses tells the Israelites that eventually they will choose a king after they will enter Israel. A Jewish king may not amass an excessive amount of wealth. He is forbidden to accumulate a huge amount of horses, wives, or personal wealth. The king writes for himself 2 Torah scrolls. One of them remains with him all the time, wherever he travels, the Torah scroll goes with him, and the other one stays in the palace. And the Torah which is following him, goes with him, is the constant reminder to him about who he is, and that he is actually the servant of the people. And reminds him that he must follow God's law. The other Torah which remains in the palace is the so-called gold standard. So if something happens with the Torah which he has got, when he comes back he can always compare and verify to make sure that there are no deviations or no damage to the Torah he carries with him, and correct whatever issues he finds any difference between his Torah which he travels with him and the one which is in the palace. Then the Parsha tells us about the Kohanim, and that they were chosen by God to be His holy servants. They do not receive any inheritance in terms of land of Israel, because God is their inheritance. They serve God. Instead, Kohanim are the beneficiaries of various priestly gifts. There are actually 24 of them. I'm not going to count all of them, including select portions of meat from the animals slaughtered for private use, not as sacrifices, as well as the tzitzis, from the crop and from the crops and from the wool, from the sheep and the skins and whatever. The priestly families, you see, initially when there were only the sons of Aaron and there were very few Kohanim, there were very few, so they were all serving in the temple all the time. However, later on there were much more, so they divided themselves into shifts, and each family was serving a different shift during the year in the temple, and they had all their designated turns. However, Cohen always retains the right to come to the temple and personally offer his own sacrifices. And then this section continues with the prohibitions against divination, fortune-telling, similar occult practices, even astrology, which basically we accept some of the astrology as far as the principles of it is concerned, but that's another discussion, right? Instead of probing into the future, we are commanded to put our faith and trust in God. Then the Parsha continues, and Moshe tells the Israelites that they will be blessed with prophets who transmit God's messages to his people. Instead of going to the astrologer, you listen to the prophet, and prophet transmits God's messages. And we Jews are commanded to obey these prophets. And this section prescribes the punishments for non-compliance with the prophet's words, as well as for the individual who falsely claims to be a prophet and speaking from God's name. Moses commands the Jews to designate 6 cities of refuge, and when God expands the borders of the land of Israel, this is when the Mashiach will come, to add another 3 cities of refuge. And these are the cities where somebody who by accident killed somebody can go and seek refuge from the punishment of the relatives of the person killed. Then Parsha continues that in any court case, a minimum of 2 witnesses are required to secure a conviction. And in a case of involving capital or corporeal punishment, particularly, individuals who testify falsely are liable to receive the punishment that they were supposed to inflict on the innocent victim as well. So, for instance, what that means is, if you testify falsely that somebody should receive $100, where in reality he wasn't entitled, it's the other person who should receive $100, then, and it's proven that you were lying, then you should pay the $100, the witness which testified falsely. Or if you testify that somebody must be killed, and then it's proven to be false statement, then you are killed. That's a very simple law, actually very logical. The procedure for battle is outlined in this section as well. And when approaching the battlefield, a Kohen addresses the troops and tells them that they should not fear the enemy because God is with them. And then he starts listing all individuals who can be exempt from the military duty before the battle. For instance, such as one who was recently betrothed or married, or who just recently built a new house, or even the ones who simply faint-hearted and scared. Why? All of this was done in order to make sure that people who going into the battle will not hesitate, will not be afraid, and will not think of their poor young wife which they just left, or their young little children which were just born, or their new house where they never had an opportunity to live. Right? So that their mind is focused on the battle, and this is why all of those people who were just married, just built a house, just had a young child or whatever, right, were told, if you are one of those, please go home. And the ones which were afraid, they were told to go home, because you should have full belief in God and Hashem and in your victory in order to go into the battle, because this is where the mind of the soldier behind the technology, the arms, the guns or whatever, is proven to be more important than the actual technology. Parsha finishes with an interesting statement that before waging the battle on any enemy, we are commanded to approach and make a peaceful overture to the enemy. Only if the enemy does not accept our offers, the battle takes place. For instance, in the battles against the Canaanite nations, if the enemy does not agree to the peace offer, the Israelites are commanded to completely annihilate them. Another statement, which is in itself very interesting, we are forbidden to cut down fruit-bearing trees while laying siege to a city, while attacking a city. And that is because those trees belong to Hashem. And And then it finishes with the whole procedure related to the unsolved murder. If somebody was found in the field, actually murdered, and nobody knew where and how, and there is a whole procedure how to investigate that. What I would like to concentrate on is on the very beginning of this parsha, where Moshe is actually telling the people that eventually they will ask for a king. You see, today we have got presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, tribal leaders, and all sorts of dictators around the world. And the command in the Torah, the command relating to a king, opens with these words, and I'm quoting. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possessions of it, and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. It continues by a warning against a king acquiring great number of horses for himself. He must not take many wives, maximum 18 actually, nor may he accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. He must write a Sefer Torah, and he is to read it all days of his life, so that he may learn to revere God, his God, and not to consider himself better than his brothers, or turn from the law to the right, or from the law to the left. So he must strictly follow the Torah law. The entire passage here is a warning. It's a warning against dangers clearly spelled out. There is a risk that a king will exploit his power, using it to acquire wealth, or wives, or horses. Why horses? Because at that time horses were the status symbol. Like today a Jaguar, or a Mercedes-Benz, or a Rolls-Royce. Right? The same story. This is exactly what Solomon, actually, King Solomon, is described as doing in the book of Kings. He had more than 1,000 wives, he had countless horses, and he was extremely, extremely wealthy. And as a matter of fact, the beginning of demise of Jewish kingdom, of his kingdom eventually, was consecrated at the night when he was marrying an Egyptian princess. And this is when I think it was Archangel Gabriel stuck a pillar in the Adriatic, which was the beginning of the birth of the Greek nation, which eventually conquered Judea. Torah says about a future king, right, that he may be tempted to lord it over the people, considering himself better than everyone else. Rings the bell, isn't it? Torah envisages the people will be asking for a king so that they can be like all the other nations around us. This is contrary to the whole spirit of the Torah, as a matter of fact. The Israelites were commanded to be different, set apart to be the nation of the priests. So, to want to be like any other nation is not what the Torah was basically stating. It's like a noble wish, but a failure of imagination, failure of nerves. You know, you don't want to be different, you want to blend in. That's what I mean. The ultimate story is the story of Prophet Samuel. It's predicted in the Samuel 8 and in Deuteronomy that people will eventually request a king. They come to Samuel, the prophet and the judge, and say, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. So there we go. This is exactly what's happened later on. Samuel was very displeased, and God then tells him, listen to all that people are saying to you. It is not you that they have rejected, but they have rejected me as the king. This seems to be the heart of the matter. Ideally, Israel should be under no other sovereign but God himself. Yet, God does not reject that request. He actually says to Samuel, listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. The people may appoint a king, but not without having been forewarned as to what are the likely consequences. Samuel gives a warning in these words. This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to the attendants, to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage of wine and give it to his officials and attendants, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. Despite that very strong warning, people still insisted. So no, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard of that, the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. What it means basically, and if you think about it, surely, logically thinking, when we don't have an authority which provides justice, security, rule of law, we don't have safety. And this is what people wanted. They didn't want the same kind of a situation when there was no rule of law, no justice, no truth before the flood. And so they didn't want the repetition of this, and this is what they were afraid of. The consequences of this, of course, when you put a king over you, whether the king is called president, prime minister, it doesn't matter, any government you put over you, you lose some of your freedoms. And this is what this discussion is all about. The people here basically recognize that they cannot function as individuals without someone having the power to ensure the rule of law and the defense of the nation. Without this, they are what philosophers call in a state of nature. There is anarchy and chaos. No one is safe. Having a life of brutal anarchy, they prefer lose some of their freedoms. Surely, in those days, every king did as he saw fit. He was the law on himself. But the only way to escape from anarchy is by everyone agreeing to transfer some of their freedoms and rights, especially the use of coercive force, to a human sovereign, to a human king, or to a human government. But yes, it comes at a high price. However, what Torah is saying, that God gave the people the choice as to whether or not to appoint a king. So it wasn't the law of Torah to appoint a king, it was an optional thing, right? And it was not compulsory, right? The second, and this is what the fundamental future of the social contract theories, is that the power ultimately vested in people. It's the people who choose the king. To be sure, there are moral limits to power. Even a human king is under the sovereignty of God. He must understand what is justice, what is not just. God gives us rules that are eternal. Politics is about the laws but those laws are temporary. And for this time, for this place, for these circumstances, for this country, for this kind of culture, etc. But what makes the politics of social contract distinctive is its insistence that the government is the free choice of a free nation. This was given in the most famous expression in the American Declaration of Independence. And it says as follows: to secure these rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what Declaration of Independence is. To secure these rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what God was telling Samuel. If the people want a king, give them a king. Israel is empowered to choose the form of government it desires, within the parameters set by the Torah law. The real issue is that the Torah sees it as, and it is not between monarchy or democracy, but between government that is or is not freely chosen by the people. To be sure, the Torah is systematically skeptical about politics all the time. And in an ideal world, Israel would be governed by God alone. Given, however, that this is not an ideal world, there must be some human power within the authority to ensure that laws are kept and enemies are repelled. But that power is never unlimited. It comes with two major constraints. First, it is a subject to the overarching authority of God and His law. And second, it is confined to the genuine pursuit of people's interests, people's happiness, not his king's or government's personal interests. Any attempt by a ruler to use power for personal advantage is illegitimate. The free society has its birth in Hebrew Bible. Far from mandating a retreat from society, the Torah is a blueprint of the society. A society built on freedom and human dignity, whose high ideals remain mesmerizing and still are our work in progress, even today. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.